Welcome to Libeth. The later sections of the Hojoki ask a more difficult question than whether the world is unstable. By this point, Chomei already knows that it is. The deeper question is whether a human being can genuinely live according to that knowledge. The 10-foot hut becomes an experiment in reduced existence, portable, simple, sufficient. Yet the more carefully Chomei describes the beauty of this life, the garden, the seasons, the music, the silence, the more another possibility begins to emerge. Has he escaped attachment, or merely transferred it into smaller and more refined forms? There is a version of the Hojoki that is easier to receive than the actual text. In that easier version, Chomei withdraws from the world, builds his hut, discovers the beauty of a simple life in nature, and achieves a kind of Buddhist serenity that the reader can admire from a comfortable distance. The disasters are the dark prologue. The hut is the bright conclusion. The argument is, simplify, reduce, let go, and you will find peace. The actual text does not end there. The actual text ends with Chomei asking himself whether his love of the hut is itself a failure to let go, and not answering. That question is the most important thing in the book. Without it, the Hojoki is a spiritual self-help manual. With it, it is something far more honest and far more demanding. To understand what makes the final self-interrogation so significant, you need to understand what precedes it, the account of daily life in the hut, which is the most serene and in some ways the most beautiful section of the text. Chomei describes the seasonal rhythm of the mountain with an attention that is neither detached nor sentimental, but simply present. In spring, wisteria hangs like purple clouds from the branches near the eaves. In summer, the cuckoo calls, and he asks it to guide him on the road to death, the Buddhist road, the road through which one passes without resistance. In autumn, the cicadas fill the air with a sound that seems to mourn for the world. In winter, the snow accumulates and dissolves, and its whiteness and disappearance are both forms of the same lesson. Each season arrives, stays for its time, and gives way to the next. None demands that things be otherwise. Each is fully what it is, while it is present. The daily life Chomei describes in and around the hut is organized entirely around what is actually present and immediately available. He gathers bracken and hogweed and nuts and berries from the mountain, food that is there, and that requires engagement with the landscape to obtain. He plays the folding organ he brought with him, music made for its own sake, in a culture where music had been primarily a social and ceremonial art form, stripped of every function except the pleasure of making sound. He reads the poetry he collected, the literary tradition without the social machinery of the court competition, the poems without the anxiety of the poet. He takes walks in the hills and pays attention to what is there. The old house foundations now submerged in vegetation, the graves of monks from generations past, the cherry blossoms at the bottom of the valley that he visits alone in the early spring and sits beside without witnesses. The particular texture of these pleasures matters, because they are not pleasures that require an audience. In the Heian world that formed Chomei, aesthetic pleasure was almost entirely social. The poetry competition was the primary form of literary engagement. Poems written to be judged by others, exchanged in correspondence as a form of social performance, included in imperial anthologies as a form of public recognition. Music was played for ceremony and for the cultivation of social reputation. The beauty of the landscape was perceived through the screen of the established aesthetic categories. The correct emotional response to autumn, to cherry blossoms, to the sound of running water. And those categories were collectively maintained and enforced. To experience beauty correctly in the Heian world was to experience it in the way that the tradition designated as correct, in a social context that confirmed the correctness. Chomei's pleasures in the hut are the same pleasures, stripped of the social dimension entirely. He plays music because it pleases him. He reads poetry because it moves him. He walks in the hills because the hills are there and he wants to be in them. There is no one to confirm that his response is correct. There is no competition, no anthology, no ceremonial occasion. The pleasure is purely the thing itself, experienced without mediation, and the discovery, which is both obvious and, in the context of the world he came from, radical, is that the pleasure survives the removal of the social scaffolding. More than survives, it deepens. The music played for no audience is more fully musical. The poem read without the competition is more fully a poem. The cherry blossom visited alone, without the established social ritual of flower viewing, is more fully a cherry blossom. This is the core of what the hut, as a philosophical object, is demonstrating. The argument is not that one should deprive oneself. The argument is that the social machinery through which pleasure is typically organized in a complex civilization is not the same as the pleasure itself, and that when the two are separated, what you find is that the pleasure is fuller without the machinery than with it. The reduction is not renunciation. It is, in Chomei's account, an increase, not in the quantity of things, but in the quality of the experience of them. The 10-foot hut is not poverty. It is precision. The Buddhist framework that underlies the hut project deserves careful attention here, because it is easy to misread what Chomei is doing as simple asceticism. The monk's denial of pleasure as a path towards spiritual advancement, and that reading misses the specific quality of the life he describes. He is not denying himself music. He has brought music with him. He is not denying himself poetry. The collection is on the shelf. He is not living in bare austerity. The garden is tended. The seasonal walks are taken with attention and pleasure. What he has done is remove the specific things that the Buddhist analysis would identify as the sources of suffering rather than pleasure. The competition for status, the anxiety of ambition, the attachment to outcomes that are outside his control, the dependence on social structures that have already proved unreliable. What remains after those are removed is not emptiness. It is the texture of a life organized around what is actually present and actually pleasurable. The concept of mujō, impermanence, is not, in the Hojoki's deployment of it, a counsel of despair. It is a principle of organization. If things do not last, then the appropriate response is not to hold them more tightly, but to receive them fully while they are present and release them when they go. The spring blossom is beautiful precisely because it will fall. The cuckoo's call has the quality it has because the cuckoo will be gone. The pleasure of the music is available because he is playing it now, in this room, in this season, without expecting it to secure anything beyond itself. The Buddhist logic is not, nothing lasts, therefore nothing matters. It is, nothing lasts, therefore what matters is the quality of attention you bring to what is present, because presence is what you actually have. The practices Chomei describes in the hut, the music, the poetry, the seasonal walks, the gathering of food, the care of the garden, are all practices of attention. They require engagement with what is actually there, as it is, without the overlay of social expectation or competitive anxiety. In this sense, the hut life is a kind of training, not in self-denial, but in the capacity to be fully present with things rather than always organizing them in relation to a future that may not arrive. The disaster catalog has already demonstrated why that future cannot be relied upon. The hut life demonstrates what becomes available when you stop relying on it. And then comes the reversal. Chomei is 60 years old, or near it. He has been in the hut for several years. He has described a life that works, that is genuinely sufficient, that has given him pleasures more real and more immediate than the life he left behind. And then he turns the question on himself. He has been arguing, implicitly throughout the second half of the text, that attachment to the things the world offers is the source of suffering, and that reducing attachment reduces suffering, and that the hut is the physical form of that reduction. Now he asks, what is my attachment to the hut? To the music I play in it, to the poetry I read in it, to the view from it, to the garden outside it, to the specific quality of light at this particular time of year in this particular place. Is this not attachment? Is the love of simplicity itself a form of the thing I was trying to leave behind? The question is not rhetorical. He does not have an answer prepared. The Buddhist framework he has operated within throughout the text would say, yes, this is still attachment. The goal is the release of all preference, the equanimity that does not depend on any particular condition, including the condition of living in a beautiful hut on a mountain with music and poetry and a garden. Chomei knows this. He knows the framework and its implications. And what he reports is that he cannot fully achieve what the framework requires. The hut is something he loves. The music is something he does not want to give up. The view is something he would not willingly relinquish. He is attached to his non-attachment, attached to the life he built to practice release from attachment, and he knows it, and he says so. The unnamed companion who appears in these final pages deepens the problem. This young person, never described, never named, present only as a brief acknowledgement, is the residue of human connection in a life that was supposed to have released human connection. Chomei did not become entirely solitary. He formed a bond, and the bond persisted, and the bond is present in the text at precisely the moment when he is interrogating his own capacity for release. The companion is not a lover or a student or a disciple in any formally described sense. He is simply there, a human presence that the withdrawal did not eliminate. And his presence suggests that even the most deliberate and sincere attempt to release the world's hold on a person does not eliminate the specifically human form of that hold. The attachment to other people, the residual need for a presence that is not landscape or music, but another person. The invocation of a Middha Buddha that closes the text is placed after the self-interrogation, not before it. This matters. If the religious invocation came first, if Chomei began by declaring his faith and then described his life in the hut as an expression of that faith, the text would be a conventional Buddhist narrative of devotion and withdrawal. By placing the invocation at the end, after the doubt has been expressed and left unresolved, Chomei makes it clear that the faith is not a foundation but a response, or an aspiration, or perhaps a hope. He says, I place my trust in a Middha. He says this after acknowledging that his life has not fully embodied the non-attachment, that the Buddhist path requires. The invocation is not a solution. It is a gesture towards something that the self-interrogation has shown he cannot fully reach on his own. The ending of the Hojoki is, in this reading, the most important thing about it. A text that ended with Chōmei in his hut, fully at peace, fully released from attachment, fully aligned with the Buddhist understanding of impermanence. That text would be false. It would be the account of an achievement that is not, in the record of the text, actually achieved. What Chōmei offers instead is the account of a genuine attempt, carried further than most people manage to carry it. That leaves a remainder. The remainder is love for the hut, for the music, for the view, perhaps for the young companion. The remainder is human. And Chōmei, at the end, does not pretend it is not there. What this means for the reader is important. The Hojoki is not offering a path to follow and a destination to arrive at. It is offering a record of travel, including the parts of the journey where the traveler is not certain where he is. The river in the opening sentence is still moving. The foam is still forming and dissolving. Chōmei is still in the hut, still playing music, still watching the seasons, still attached to the specific texture of a life he loves. The philosophy is real. The life it produced is real. And the question it leaves unanswered is the most real thing of all. The greatness of the Hojoki ultimately depends on the fact that Chōmei never answers this question. A lesser text would conclude with serenity and certainty. Instead, the book ends with self-suspicion. The hut may be simpler than the court, but simplicity itself can become an identity. Solitude can become possession. Even non-attachment can become something one clings to. That unresolved tension is why the Hojoki continues to feel intellectually alive. It is not a manual for escaping the world, nor a celebration of minimalism before modern minimalism existed. It is a record of a person trying, imperfectly and honestly, to live within impermanence without lying to himself about how difficult that truly is. That's all for today on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.